Oh, we got a big one. The Auburn Tigers head to Lexington for one of the biggest battles in the SEC.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Yes, this is a crossover edition of Locked On Auburn and Locked On Kentucky. I'm Zach Blackerby, the host of Locked On Auburn. He, of course, is the Lance Dawe, host of Locked On Kentucky. And thank you so much for making us your first listen every single day. Lance, our friends at FanDuel giving Auburn a few points in this one. Little surprise, the line opens at 5.5. I thought it'd be closer to a push just because of the way Kentucky is able to play, especially in big games throughout the year. I do think Auburn should be favored. 5.5 seems like a lot, but there's a lot at stake in this game.
Yeah, there's a lot at stake here. I think for Auburn, who is trying to close out a regular season title in the SEC, and there's a lot at stake here for Kentucky, because if they win this game, you talk about moving seed lines, which I think at the end of the day could prove to be very important just based off the matchups they would get as a 3 or possibly a 4 if things go poorly here towards the end of the season. But this is also, I think, for Auburn trying to break a very long drought. Haven't won in Rupp Arena since, I believe, 1988, if I'm not mistaken. So they're trying to come in here and make a statement. Meanwhile, Kentucky trying to get healthy. I think that's part of the reason why you see that line at 5.5. I think it's part of the reason why KenPom currently has Auburn winning this game by 5 points. If the Wildcats can get some of that health, though, I think you see an incredibly competitive game here.
So, I mean, I'm sure you've talked about it a bunch on your show, but for the Auburn folks tuning in, give us kind of the skinny on Kentucky's health situation.
Okay, so their starting 5 at the beginning of the season was Lamont Butler at point. They had Otega-Owe at shooting guard, Jackson Robinson at the 3, Andrew Carr at the 4, and Amari Williams at the 5. Butler, Robinson, and Carr have all rotated out of the lineup entirely at various points this season due to injury. Robinson with his wrist, Butler with his shoulder, and then Carr with his back. Carr seems to be pretty healthy right now, all things considered, but over the past few games, Butler and Robinson have not been playing essentially at all. This Oklahoma game, Robinson got 10 minutes, I believe. Butler got 20 before fouling out. That was the first time they had played, I believe, since February 8th. Against South Carolina, or February 4th against Ole Miss. They did not play in that South Carolina game, if I'm not mistaken. But over the course of these last several games, Kentucky's kind of had to operate without both their best defender in Lamont Butler and then their best shooter in SEC play in Jax. So the Cats have been down 2 very important pieces, and now you're heading into this game kind of wondering where their status is. Right before we hopped on to record, Mark Pope had a press conference, said Butler actually came out pretty good of the Oklahoma game, shoulders looking great. Robinson, on the other hand, not so much, was the reason why they sat him pretty early in that second half. So if Robinson is healthy alongside Butler, I think you see a lot of problems for Auburn. If just Butler, it kind of plays into, again, talking about this line, why it's at 5.5, et cetera, because while Butler is a great defender, not as good of a scorer as Robinson, and you need all of these different threats across the roster to kind of get that gravity beyond the arc that Kentucky needs.
You know both these teams so well with just kind of your knowledge of the SEC. So when you look at some of these names that you just mentioned that may play for Kentucky, but if they do play, they're not 100%. Yeah. What's the matchup that goes in Auburn's favor if you had to solidify one?
I'm going to be honest. I think it's if you're looking at a specific matchup, you're looking at Denver Jones against possibly whoever Kentucky wants to put in that backcourt, whether it be Travis Perry if Lamont Butler is not fully healthy, whether it be against Jackson Robinson if he's out there, Otega-Owe. I think Denver could be a huge aspect of this game. You could also put Tahaad Pettiford in there as well. If you get to Kentucky's bench, I think the speed and athleticism starts to have a major drop off. So you're looking at Jones as a driver and a distributor. You look at him in the pick and roll game where Kentucky has been obliterated this season, health or not. If you're looking at Pettiford, you're looking at even more speed or somebody that you have to step out and contest, something that Kentucky has not been great at this season against smaller guards. So I think that the speed and athleticism of Auburn's backcourt, but specifically the two-way nature of Denver Jones, I think is fascinating because not only does Jones give you that scoring ability and that ability to handle the ball so well, but also you've got on the other side of the coin, okay, well, what if Butler's not healthy? Oh, you've got Travis Perry back there, and he is not scoring. against Denver Jones, which could be a major problem.
Yeah, and Denver Jones is seen as this guy who can, hurt you from deep. But I mean, Bruce Pearl's talked about him being one of the best defensive players in the SEC, and I mean, Bruce Pearl's credited him as one of the best perimeter defenders in college basketball. And he hasn't really gotten that attention that he probably deserves from that. But when you go up against this Mark Pope style of play, this Kentucky team can score at will. To me, I think that's the dynamic of this that is most interesting. Yes, both offenses can score. Both teams can score, and they've got several different guys who can blink, and all of a sudden they have double digits. But I do think Auburn's defense is flying under the radar a little bit, and that's actually why I'm kind of giving Auburn an edge here.
I think that's completely fair to say. And look, if you want to go back to my previous episode on my channel, I talked a lot yesterday about the mental aspect of this game. And kind of the summarization of it is that, look, mentally for Kentucky, they have to remain tough, because if they are able to do so and kind of able to kind of push Auburn and rush them, that's kind of where you're only going to have success, I think, defensively in this game. You have to make them make bad decisions by applying pressure offensively. Whereas on the other side of the coin, look, if Auburn's able to kind of clamp down here in the first half, kind of able to get something going through the middle eight, so to speak, between the first half and the second half, it puts a lot of pressure on Kentucky, and I don't know if they can necessarily handle that. Auburn's got length, Auburn's got size, Auburn's got experience. They've got guys that want to go out there and commit to playing defense. Again, something that Kentucky has not done consistently all season long. But yeah, I think the way that Auburn could kind of clamp down on what Kentucky wants to do on the perimeter here could be fascinating. The most interesting thing to me, if you want to talk stats, is that Auburn's 11th nationally in three-point defense, but in point distribution, I think it's where you see that they really clamp down beyond the arc. So point distribution is like the percentage of total points that you get from 3 to in the foul line. So if you score 100 points, you get 25 of them from the charity stripe, 25% your point distribution. Auburn is only allowing opponents to get 25.7% of their points from 3, 345th nationally. Kentucky is 98th nationally at 34.7% of their points from 3 on offense. So I think that kind of is where you look at this game saying, Jones, the perimeter defense, can they kind of hold Kentucky from getting those shots off? And if so, you may have some issues.
And is that even how Auburn tries to attack Kentucky? I mean, over the last 2 games, Janai Broom has looked fully healthy again. To go back to what we talked about at the start of the segment about health, this is kind of the healthiest Auburn has looked since Janai Broom's return. I mean, or I guess since he got injured. To me, I do think that has sparked a little bit of extra offense for the Tigers. But we saw what they did against Ole Miss a few nights ago. It was remarkable. It was a remarkable offensive performance, and a lot of that had to do with the offense operating early through Janai Broom. We saw that earlier this season, the offense operate through Janai Broom, especially early in contests, against Houston and, when they went to Maui. How does Kentucky shut down Janai Broom? Or is it just you try to limit him?
Again, this is kind of, I tried to handle this as best as I could on yesterday's show without saying there's no way to stop him. But I think that a lot of what Kentucky's going to have to do against Broom comes outside of him and comes outside of the individual matchup against him. Again, I think a lot of this is mental. You watch that Florida game, you see how Florida was able to make shots in the first half, going a big run, multiple runs actually, into the second half. And then Broom and the Tigers started making mistakes offensively. I think the shot selection was incredibly poor, most of which I think came on Broom's part at various points in that game. So it's not necessarily, we have a guy that we can put on Broom and they can kind of shut him down defensively. No, I think it's a lot of kind of making the mental clock speed up, making him realize, okay, you're down by 12. There's 16 minutes to go. You have to start making things work. And I think that's where Kentucky can really put a hurting on you, is by speeding up the pace, getting out in transition, and causing those problems. Kentucky has not been a great turnover team all season, but over the last 5 games, they've been stripping opponents. They've been stripping guys and getting out and scoring off of it. You have to watch that space in this game if Kentucky does get up. What does Broom do? Does he settle down? Is he able to maintain composure and finish at the rim? Because I think he's going to get what he wants. But if he's not able to, it's the mistakes that I think could prove costly.
Right. The environment, and I don't want to say vibes, but I'm going to. The vibes about this game, they seem flipped from what we normally see between Auburn and Kentucky. I want to jump into that in just a moment. Right here on this crossover edition of Locked on Auburn and Locked on Kentucky. Today's show brought to you by our friends at Fabric. Life moves fast, especially when you have a family and one day you're watching your kids take their first steps and before you know it, they're off to college. Fabric by Gerber Life makes it simpler to get term life insurance that fits your family's needs. With Fabric, you can apply for term insurance online right from your couch. You can be covered in under 10 minutes, and in many cases, there's no health exam required. Peace of mind, it's affordable coverage, and it even goes beyond life insurance with other digital products there. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their families. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/lockedoncollege. Fabric is spelled Fabric. Meetfabric.com/lockedoncollege. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Assurance Company, not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions. Lance, when we talk about the series between Auburn and Kentucky, I mean, this was a huge game for Auburn for years. And it was that way with most teams in the SEC. The rest of the SEC is now caught up to Kentucky. And like, it feels weird to say this, but this is now feels like another game for Auburn, but Kentucky's hosting the number one team in college basketball. It's normally the other way around. It's such an interesting dynamic from what we're used to seeing.
Yeah, it's definitely kind of taking the script and flipping it on its head. I mean, typically you see Kentucky here as the big, bad, big blue nation, and you see Auburn coming into town, and you don't think twice about it. At least you didn't a decade ago. You think, oh, we'll take care of that, and we'll walk out of here with a win, and typically they did in dramatic fashion. It was typically an explosion offensively. Auburn can't keep up, 86-54. You're seeing stuff like that. You actually saw it a couple of years ago, believe it or not, in Rupp Arena, but this feels different because of what this Auburn team has been able to do resume wise. You're not coming in and saying, oh, well, Auburn's 23-4 or what have you, because they've played a lot of weak opponents. No, go look at that non-conference slate. I mean, it is legitimate. They have played about every single legitimate contender that you could play under the sun, and they've won. Minus Duke, they've been able to beat everyone. And so coming into this game, you're seeing Kentucky not necessarily in desperation mode, as the season comes to an end, but there's definitely a lot at stake here for the Cats, and it's usually the other way around where you see Auburn coming in saying they need this for resume purposes, they need this to get back in the title race, they need this for a double bye in the SEC tournament. Kentucky's trying to get all of those things, and it's really interesting how the way the SEC landscape has kind of shaped over the last several years to allow that to happen. NIL, transfer portal, etc. The amount of money that the SEC has poured into basketball has really allowed it to become a well-rounded, incredible league. And I think you're going to see that for years to come. And it's a question of whether or not in future years Auburn can continue to establish that dominance, or if somebody like Kentucky is able to kind of rise back to relevancy, I guess, so to speak, because of what the work Mark Pope has been able to put in.
Yeah. So Bruce Pearl, in his post-game, or I guess the Auburn basketball post-game show, he was asked about the upcoming game against Kentucky, obviously, and made a few comments about like how they haven't forgotten that Kentucky went into Neville and it was game day a year ago. And, you know, the Calipari made the comments of, you know, all these folks are here to see us, and that rubbed them the wrong way. I mean, it's a year later and they're still thinking about it. Do you think that outside stuff matters with how emotional this Auburn basketball team is?
That's a really interesting question about the emotion and the mentality of this Auburn team. It's something I've talked about at length. I think it could be a factor for Auburn for sure. I think what you have to understand as a fan, or if you're a Kentucky player in that locker room, is that this is a completely different situation for everyone involved. I think Kentucky is going up against one of the best college basketball teams we've seen in the last 20 plus years. Meanwhile, Auburn is going up against a team comprised of players that they haven't seen this year. They haven't seen this style of play with this coach. And it's kind of an interesting, not necessarily a clash, I should say, but it's a really interesting style dynamic between these two teams, where Auburn, I think, emotionally is going to come into this game. They're going to be fired up. They're going to want that back to go into Rupp Arena, kind of get revenge and break this streak. But also at the same time, I think if you're a bystander watching this, you have to understand, I think you have to put those emotions aside, because this isn't Cal's program anymore. It's Mark Pope. Mark Pope's not going to come at you and be smart like Cal was. He's not going to be harsh. He's not going to rub you the wrong way. This is I think a genuinely great human being and a kind person.
Way different.
And he's not going to kind of establish that malice that I think a lot of people came to know the Kentucky program by. So at least people that were on the outside looking in. So I think that for Auburn, emotions play a big part in this one. For Kentucky and for everyone watching, I don't know if that much is actually at stake.
Yeah. I mean, that is what's interesting. Like when you talk about what's at stake in this, Auburn, the magic number for Auburn at this point is 2. When you talk about either they can win 2, or if they win 1 and Alabama loses 1, they want to win the thing. They want to win the SEC outright. And I think all 3 of Auburn's games left are winnable. But they're all tough, and they're kind of all tough for different reasons. I mean, going to Lexington, going to College Station, then hosting Alabama in the regular season finale. Like Auburn needs to go 2-1 in these 3, and I think they do it, Lance. I think they do it, but those three games are tough. What's at stake here, though, for Kentucky? What are they playing for right now when it kind of seems like their seed line is pretty much decided? They might can move up a few seeds in the SEC tournament if that's even important to Kentucky. What are they playing for right now?
Turns out I think, in my opinion, they're playing for a lot more than people realize. Just kind of walk with me here. So Bracket Matrix is one of my favorite websites on the planet. You'll see that right now over 84 different either analysts or websites, ESPN, CBS, etc., have put out a bracket projecting where Kentucky will land in the field of 64. They're currently projected as the 3rd best 3 seed. Their average seed is 3.19. If you go and look and see the 13 seed, at 13 seed that 14. Wow. That they would be matched up against. It's either going to be James Madison or Utah Valley. JMU, pretty solid Sun Belt team. Utah Valley has been killing it in the WAC. I am all about, personally, for this Kentucky team getting out of the first round, because if you do, I think you have a lot of success in the tournament. Case in point, Wildcats have struggled against pretty mid competition this year, but they've played out of their mind against top 15, top 10, top 5 opponents. Right. If you can get out of the area where you're playing the Akrons, the Lipscombs, the High Points, the Liberties, like all of these really good mid majors, and you can play a weaker seed to start, that's what's at stake for me. You look at the 15 seed line: Montana, Robert Morris, Central Connecticut State, Norfolk State. I don't want to play Norfolk, but the other 3 seeds I think are manageable. So Kentucky right now has the opportunity to jump to that 2 seed line if a couple of things happen. You get a win against Auburn, or you get a win against Missouri, and then you make a run in the SEC tournament. How are you going to make a run in the SEC tournament? You have to rise in the standings. Right now, Kentucky, I believe, is 7th or 8th, but they're tied with Ole Miss, who has the tiebreaker over the Cats. So if you were able to win this Kentucky game, able to win against LSU, I think you are in the SEC standings more likely to get the 6 or a 7 seed, avoid Auburn, playing Auburn a second time, make a deeper run in Nashville, get more quad 1 wins, rise onto the 2 seed line, play an easier opponent. That's what I'm all about here, is not playing a difficult mid-major to start and then making a run off of that, because I think any opponent after that, Kentucky can handle mentally. It's the first game where you have to come into it going, not, okay, this is their Super Bowl. Okay, we have to throttle this opponent and make a run, where that's not really been the mentality for UK this season. They've gotten beat by some teams that should not have beaten them. So that's what's at stake for me, is just rising in the seats.
It's so interesting. You just made an argument for the 8th/9th team in the SEC right now to get a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament. Like, that's where we're at right now. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. Crazy. So who wins this game? We take a stab at it next, right here on Locked On Auburn and Locked On Kentucky. This is a crossover. I'm so sorry. Today's show brought to you by our friends at Prize Picks. Lance, can you imagine playing daily fantasy anywhere other than with our friends at Prize Picks?
Absolutely not.
I don't want to. I wouldn't want to do that. With Prize Picks, you just pick more or less on at least 2 player projections. And if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. It's fast, easy, and keeps every game exciting. What is your favorite sport to play daily fantasy sports to with Prize
Gentlemen,
Picks?
I think it's got to be basketball, specifically college basketball. I like some Kentucky stuff on Prize Picks. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, sure. I'm telling you right now, as we record this, the stuff isn't up on Prize Picks yet. It's usually like the night before.
Right.
But I'm taking the over. Like when it comes to scoring tomorrow, I just think there's going to be a lot of points, Lance. I think there's going to be a lot of points. And so if you want to cheer for that, head over to Prize Picks, download their app today. Use code LOCKEDONCollege, all one word, Locked On College, to get $50 instantly after you play that first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONCollege for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. This is a crossover edition of Locked On Auburn and Locked On Kentucky. Zach Blackerby, Lance Dawe here with you. So, I've already kind of told you, like, I am giving an Auburn a slight lead, but I guess before we get into our official picks, like, which Kentucky do we see? I mean, like you said, they've struggled against teams that they definitely should have handled, but they lost to Texas recently. What was the other SEC team they should have beaten recently?
It was Arkansas back on February 1st. I think it's the other game you look at where you should have won that game.
Maybe so. Yeah. Cal was going to pull out everything he possibly could.
Yeah,
in that one. But I'm expecting Kentucky's best because it seems like in the big games this season, Duke, Florida, like you've seen the best version of Kentucky. And so to me, like I'm expecting at home at a very energetic Rupp, I'm expecting the better version of Kentucky. Do you think that's fair?
In my mind, I keep going back to Kentucky's 2 games against Tennessee this year where they just played their heart out. And one of them came recently on February 11th in Rupp Arena. I think Auburn stylistically is completely different from Tennessee defensively because Tennessee allows those 3-point shots. Auburn doesn't. But I think the mentality is going to be the same. I think you're going to see Kentucky show up, show out, and play one of their best games of the season collectively in terms of energy and focus. Does that translate to made baskets and solid defense? We'll have to see, but the mental aspect for me in this game is so huge. The maturity of these players in this moment is kind of what you're looking at least for me. It's less about, oh, the analytics say this, or, oh, you look at the matchup with this player and he's 30 pounds heavier, you can drive and kick on him. Obviously, that's part of it, but I think it's about if lucky shots fall or shots fall, period, for one team or another in a run, you have to watch that space and see how the opposing team responds mentally, because I think, again, this is going to be an incredibly tight game, back and forth type stuff. We'll just have to see what happens matchup wise, but I think Kentucky's going to play their A game regardless of whether or not they're healthy.
I agree. I'm going to go Auburn 92, Kentucky 88. I think this is a high scoring one, and I think it's even closer than that, but foul situation at the end of the game may stretch it out just a little bit. But I think Auburn wins, but I don't think it's a lopsided affair by any stretch of the imagination.
I think what Kentucky does offensively in this game is going to decide it, whether or not they were able to, quite frankly, keep up with what Auburn is going to throw at them, because they are such a versatile and efficient offense. I think that what Auburn does, putting Kentucky on the line, could be interesting in this game, because I think, again, aggression in this one at the rim could play a huge factor for UK. You look at guys like Dawe, who scored 28 points against Oklahoma. Their last 18 points of the matchup there on Wednesday night, Dawe scored. He is a great driver and a great finisher at the rim. Somebody like Jones is going to have to step up and make plays on him. CBM's also going to have to play a huge factor here physically. Does Kentucky draw fouls? Do they get extra points? Do they get Auburn in foul trouble? Do they hit those threes in transition? I'm essentially asking for a perfect game on offense, right? And I mentioned earlier, you kind of
one of the better defenses in the country. Yeah.
Right. Like I said earlier, I think you're going to get that at various points in this game because of the focus and the mentality. I think Kentucky, I've already gone on record, I think 3 different episodes now, saying I think Kentucky's going to win this game. And I think it comes down to the mental aspect and the making the clutch shots in the moments where it matters. Go back and watch the Tennessee game that Kentucky played on February 11th. You had bench production. They hit threes in transition. Trent Noah, Travis Perry stepped up out of nowhere, by the way. They had to step up because they were hurt, but you didn't expect the production. You're going to have to get the unexpected here from Kentucky in order to win. I think it happens. Obviously, there's going to be a game every season where you just kind of look up and go, oh, yeah, that team in the gym, they just can't miss. It doesn't matter who it is. It doesn't matter who they're playing. In the SEC, you're going to get a game where the opponent just shoots lights out and just goes ballistic while they're at home. I'm calling my shot. I'm saying it's happening here. And it's just a matter of whether or not Auburn mentally can respond to that, which they've done it at various points this season. But if you look at their 2 losses and you watch their shot selection, things kind of had to bounce their way to keep it close. And even then, there was a lot of things that were rushed that could have gotten out of hand. So I'm going to take Kentucky in a game that is, I think, going to end up being very volatile.
I'm going to predict the player of the game in this one, and I think it's Tahaad Pettiford for Auburn. I think he pops for like 17 or 18 points. He's had a rough few games from scoring. His assists have been fine and all that, but this is a guy who shows up in big games. I make the joke all the time on my show. It's like, if you don't have a number next to your name, he just doesn't care about you. For whatever reason, we kind of saw his coming out party against Houston, at Houston earlier in the season, and it just seems like anytime there's a big game, he steps up. So I'm calling on Tahaad Pettiford to kind of be the guy to watch from the Auburn point of view here.
I'm calling on Amari Williams to be the man in this game. I think he's going to be the X factor for a few reasons. Look, you talk about Broom and what he's able to do, rebounding the ball, finishing inside. He's got a really high assist rate. Amari Williams does all of those things. I don't think he's talked about nearly enough. He has the same assist rate as Broom does. He is super efficient over his last, I would say, 6 or 7 games. Had the 4th triple-double in Kentucky history against Ole Miss, where he dropped 10+ assists. This kid is special. With the way that Mark Pope wants to run his offense through his 5-man, you're going to see some crazy stuff from him in this game. How does Broom respond to that defensively? I think it's going to tell the tape, or it's going to tell in the tape. Amari Williams is my X factor.
Lance, for all the Auburn folks watching, if they want more Kentucky goodness, where do they go?
They can find me at Locked On Kentucky. Look, if you want to leave a mean comment, if you want to leave a positive one, doesn't matter. I would love to hear Auburn fans'
just
thoughts
stop
on this
by.
one.
Yeah,
just let me know what you think. I'm fascinated to hear what Auburn's fan base has to say about this one, because all I've heard is Kentucky. I have not seen Auburn fans anywhere, so let me know.
Wow. And for all the Kentucky folks, do the same. Check out Locked On Auburn wherever you get your podcasts, and same way you're watching Locked On Auburn, you can watch Locked On Kentucky. Please like this video. Please subscribe to our channels. We'll see you next time. This has been a crossover edition of Locked On Auburn and Locked On Kentucky.